The word codependency is used a lot in 12-step programs, but what exactly is it? For years, my understanding was simply someone who is affected by another person's alcoholism, drug use, or unhealthy behavior, which is 100% true. However, it can mean a whole lot more. The purpose of this video is to look more in depth into what it is and how the word came about, so it's kind of a history lesson as well. Of course, this is simply my take on things. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a professional in the recovery field, so take what you hear with a grain of salt. It's meant to be food for thought. To understand the meaning of codependency, you need to go back to the early days of the original 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous. In those days, the alcoholics were typically men, and their wives would often meet at the same time, often in the very next room, to discuss their troubles in dealing with their alcoholic husbands. These groups of mostly women would one day adopt the 12 steps of AA and officially call themselves Al-Anon family groups. Prior to becoming an organized fellowship, they went by different names, but they often referred to themselves as para-alcoholics. What does para-alcoholic mean? Well, the prefix para has a few different meanings. The primary definition is next to or side by side. So then, para-alcoholic quite literally means next to or side by side an alcoholic, which these women most certainly were, both at home and at their meetings. Besides this being an accurate description, it also brought to light that alcoholics don't exist in isolation. That for every alcoholic, there will be para-alcoholics, those who work with, live with, or otherwise care about the alcoholic, and they're affected by the disease. Al-Anons often say they take on the isms of alcoholism, which validates the second definition of para, which is closely resembling. This is very often the case. Ask any Al-Anon and they'll tell you that family members often become as sick, physically, mentally, and spiritually, as the alcoholic. It's hard to know if these early groups attributed additional meaning to para-alcoholic. However, let's pause for a moment to reflect on the literal definition of para-alcoholic. It means one who is in proximity to and resembles an alcoholic. I see it as the precursor to the word codependent. So then, how did we get from para-alcoholic to codependent? And what does it mean? Well, in the 1970s, alcohol treatment centers began to realize, or at least to deal with, the fact that alcoholics often operated within a dysfunctional family dynamic, which helped to enable and therefore perpetuate the alcoholic's behavior and drinking. In other words, they believed that family members weren't only affected by the alcoholic, they often became part of the problem, contributing their own dysfunction, as it were, into the mix. These individuals, generally the spouses, partners, and significant others, including parents, were referred to as co-alcoholics. Co means together or associated with. So it has a similar meaning to para-alcoholic, but with the added connotation of contributing to the problem as opposed to being only affected by the problem. Therefore, treating the alcoholic required the consideration of the co-alcoholic as well. And as treatment expanded to include the spouses and partners of alcoholics, they discovered something surprising. Many, not all, but many had one or more alcoholic partners in the past. In other words, they would get out of one alcoholic relationship and then be attracted to another alcoholic. It seemed that dysfunctional relationships were preferable to functional relationships, so they sought out alcoholics. In other words, they didn't randomly wind up being in a relationship with an alcoholic. It wasn't simply a matter of chance. For some, it was a matter of choice, although perhaps a subconscious choice. By the 1980s, it became clear that spouses, partners, and family members of addicts exhibited the same traits as co-alcoholics. So the name was changed to widen the umbrella, as it were, to include any chemical dependency, of which alcohol is just one. Codependency is short for co-chemically dependent. It has the exact same meaning and implication as co-alcoholic. And in practice, in general use of the word, it also applies to those in a relationship with a compulsive gambler, overeater, sex addict, or narcissist. The list goes on and on. Although you could say that the gambler, overeater, and sex addict is also chemically dependent. However, not on external chemicals, but rather the chemicals released by his own brain when he acts out certain behaviors. The final breakthrough came after observing that codependents seem to share common personality traits, such as low self-esteem, approval-seeking, as well as people-pleasing, which made them great enablers, and it turns out, the perfect partner for alcoholics, addicts, and narcissists. It also turned out that many of these people grew up in alcoholic or otherwise dysfunctional homes, which is why they sought out dysfunctional relationships in adulthood, to recreate the dysfunction they were familiar with. They had a hard time doing normal. It then became clear that codependency was a disease in its own right. I've learned a lot by doing this video. I see disease as being more gray than black and white. And it's also dynamic, not static, which means I can be para-alcoholic at times, I can be co-alcoholic at times, and I can be codependent at times, sometimes only being affected, sometimes contributing to the dysfunction, and sometimes seeking dysfunction, needing dysfunction. Thank God for recovery. I'm Robbie Bobby. Thank you for listening, and keep coming back.